Hi everybody, welcome to part 2 of video series 2 where we're talking about enterprise bargaining agreements and in all of that then the challenge that unions and representatives can bring to a process as we start to work through that for this particular organisation. In terms of a bit of a recap from the first part of this series is that this aged care provider and community care provider has a number of current enterprise bargaining agreements, of those of which have expired, and within a number of changes both internally and within the market has meant that the business now has an appetite to move and to change. And there's the need, certainly as a result of changes in not only the industry but also as a result of political government changes, for example. That appetite's much sooner and much more timely than it would have been at the time that these agreements expired in 2011 and 2014. So this piece of this part of this series, I wanted to take you through the ER strategy, which involves some robust conversations with the board and the executive leadership team to how it wanted to approach its ER strategy moving forward. So I'll take you through what that looked like and felt like to why we got to where we are now. And in all of that too is about what our proposal would be around moving forward to make sure that we got those efficiencies and the flexibilities that this business needed to be able to be sustainable over the longer term and to meet the needs of our clients, which is evolving and always changing. So in terms of the thought bubble that came through, in summary probably for each of you around the executive and board discussions around its ER strategy, is that the organisation had made a decision right up front, I'd say, around the fact that it wants to continue to negotiate enterprise agreements now and into the future. And as I'd stated in the first part was that we've been doing this for about 15 years and that it is still an appetite for us to negotiate collectively, which is good because it means that we allow our employees to find their voice themselves or through unions. What that means is that the business has an appetite to say that we want to be more than just a modern award minimum wage provider in the industry, that we want to compensate our employees higher than what they would otherwise receive in accordance with any modern award or national employment standard. So up front the business is saying it wants to be a leader. It hasn't said how far it wants to go in terms of that arrangement, but certainly has indicated that it would prefer to continue to move down the enterprise agreement path. So that's a key consideration that we need to take into account as we start to look and shape the ER strategy. What we've identified though is that the currently expired agreements, although they continue to operate, don't account for the same flexibilities now that they did back then, with a view that there's a number of things that are currently important to this particular organisation which currently don't provide or more so restrict terms and conditions of employment. And a few of those would be minimum shift engagements. As I said, if a client requires a 15-minute shift or 15-minute visit, our obligation at the moment is to pay 3. So effectively there's a cost to the business which is non-billable. And in summary, in terms of some of the costings that I had to do, I think it costs the business about $100,000 a year in non-billables by continuing to service a client, for example, for a shift less than 3 hours. So it's quite a compelling argument. There's a need for us to balance and also to reduce that where we can to get some greater flexibility and efficiency in our business. Span of hours, being an aged care provider, it's important, our clients demand our services all year round, a 24/7 operation, and our agreements don't provide for that. At the present, it provides 6 till 6 Monday to Friday, not 6 to 6 Monday to Sunday, or 6 to midnight, or 6 till 8 p.m. Monday to Sunday. So that's a bit of an issue. Wage increases, though, over the life of those agreements were 3 to 3.5%, and clearly we've seen, as a result of CPI, so Consumer Price Index, and also the annual Fair Work wage increases that have been, I'd say, handed down over the last couple of years. We haven't seen it go much higher than about 2.4%. Which means employees during the course of those agreements enjoyed a significant percentage increase, I would say. It's been a few years now since they've had an increase of that type. How do we then sell that if we move to the agreement making process again, but also remain competitive? So that's another factor that the organisation needs to consider in its overall mix around its ER strategy. So overall then, how do we sell the premise of flexibility when the organisation's view, clearly, looking at those old agreements, is to diminish or reduce entitlements to meet client demands? We would never reduce entitlements that were less than or below the award, because effectively that would not pass the boot, being the better off overall test with Fair Work. But clearly we can see that the things that we applied back in 2014 or earlier were much more attractive than probably the position the business wants to be at now. We need to be 24/7. You want to have the possible lowest rate for our clients to see that they're getting quality service for a reasonable price. We still then have to balance that off with a pay rise and pay rises for our employees and acknowledging their value and worth. Shift allowances probably won't apply if we change that span of hours to Monday to Sunday instead of Monday to Friday, where employees would have been enjoying possibly afternoon shift penalties and those things. And those 3% wage increases, aren't that much or aren't seen that much anymore. And certainly looking at our competitors, rates certainly aren't as high as they were, 3, 4, 5 years ago. Also, too, in terms of those agreements, there was a real focus on it being by position or by stream. So we had an enterprise agreement for our administration staff, for our care staff, for our nursing staff, and for our allied health staff. Is that the best way for us to do business, noting that we have a predominantly home care business, we have a predominant residential business, and we have a number of other commercial entities that provide services in, say, that allied health space? So is it important for us now to look at business stream or business unit or entity versus position stream? And it's important to probably consider that, because if you look at our aged care residential business, that is a facility with beds, with carers that do different things to carers that do different things in our clients' homes, residents, for example. So is it now a shift from, say, position streams to looking at entities? Noting that certainly in our community sector, government funding is much more prevalent in terms of running and guiding that business than it would be purely in aged care, where clients in aged care specifically would bring with them funds to be able to support, a bond to stay in the facility and a few other things. I don't want to confuse you or make that more complicated than it needs to be, but it's probably important to understand that there may other be business reasons for why we need to adapt or change our model. So if that was the case and you were faced with that type of challenge, maybe have a think about what would you advise management? Would you advise them any differently in relation to the points that I've just mentioned? How would you try and sell that to management to try and get a beneficial outcome? And how do you think unions might feel about membership coverage if we were to disperse their workforce? For example, carers under one agreement for home care and then carers in, say, the residential agreement. What things might be an issue for them, and what could we do from a management organisation perspective to make sure that they've got some sort of security and certainty around a process of renegotiation. Also noting we haven't really engaged our employees before or since the last lot of agreement negotiations probably 3 years ago, and how do we set ourselves up for success? So maybe take some time to have a think about, would you do anything differently, noting all of that information I've shared, and any questions, concerns that you might raise or address with, say, your leaders around getting the best outcome, or to make sure that we've got a plan so we put our best foot forward. What I'll do is I'll leave this particular part now here. Conscious that I've left you with a couple of questions, and I do want you to have a think about your approach. And then what we'll do in part 3, and possibly if there's a part 4, the proposal that this particular organisation put forward in relation to moving forward on its ER strategy. How did effectively that process go in terms of next steps with negotiation between the union and the employee reps, and then specifically how did we try and bring our business need around flexibility to the fore, with a view that we needed to provide some certainty and some security certainly for our employees over the longer term. So more to come, but encourage you to have a think about those questions, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.